On Christmas Eve 1914, something extraordinary happened on the front lines of World War I. Soldiers entrenched in the brutal conditions of the Western Front, where mud, blood, and gunfire had defined their existence, suddenly laid down their arms. For a brief moment, the horrors of war faded as soldiers from both sides, Britain and Germany, gathered in no man's land, exchanging greetings, sharing food, and even playing a friendly game of football. This spontaneous act of peace between enemies was a powerful reminder of our shared humanity, but it was also a fleeting moment, quickly overridden by the brutal realities of war. But what if this temporary truce didn't end on Christmas Day? Imagine if the Christmas truce had sparked a lasting change. What if this act of goodwill led to a broader movement, forcing governments to negotiate peace and end the war early? The consequences could have been profound, potentially preventing World War II and reshaping the entire 20th century. In this alternate history, we'll explore how the events of that Christmas could have transformed history. Stick around until the end, where we'll have a quiz to test your knowledge of this pivotal moment in history. In late 1914, the Great War had been raging for months, leaving Europe entrenched in a deadly stalemate. The Western Front, a continuous line of trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland, became a symbol of the war's brutal reality. Soldiers endured harsh conditions: mud, rats, disease, and constant bombardment. Despite the war's scale and technological advancements, it had turned into a deadly game of attrition. By Christmas, both the Allied and Central Powers were exhausted by the relentless slaughter. The war had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, and morale was at an all-time low. Soldiers began questioning the purpose of the fight, with the bitter winter cold emphasizing the futility of their struggle. This bleak situation raises a deeper question. What if World War I had never happened? Watch our related video. It was against this backdrop of despair that the Christmas truce occurred. On December 24, 1914, German and British soldiers in several areas along the Western Front initiated a spontaneous ceasefire. What began as a few isolated gestures of goodwill, singing carols across the trenches and exchanging small gifts, quickly spread. Soldiers ventured into no man's land to shake hands, share food, and even play impromptu games of football. This unexpected moment of peace, born from shared humanity amidst the violence, defied the orders of military commanders. The Christmas truce became a powerful symbol of the futility of war and the common bonds that unite us. Yet, after a brief respite, the fighting resumed, and the war continued for another 4 years, with the dream of lasting peace fading away. What if the Christmas truce of 1914 didn't end with the return of trenches? In this alternate timeline, the soldiers' shared experience of peace sparked a much larger movement. What began as a brief ceasefire quickly grew into widespread refusal to fight. Soldiers from both the Allied and Central Powers began organizing and speaking out against the war, demanding that their leaders listen to their voices. The truce spread beyond the front lines, with soldiers on both sides calling for an official end to the fighting. They could no longer ignore the humanity they saw in each other during those peaceful hours. Pressure from the ranks forced military commanders to reconsider their positions, and the idea of a negotiated peace began to take shape. Back in their home countries, the public rallied behind the soldiers' call for peace. With morale at an all-time low and the horrors of the war weighing heavily on the population, governments began to reconsider their strategies. The shock of soldiers rejecting orders to fight pushed political leaders to seek out diplomacy, something they had previously rejected. Major world powers, now facing public pressure and the realization that the war might not be winnable, began talks toward an early peace treaty. In this scenario, a ceasefire could have led to a political revolution, with war-weary nations negotiating an end to the conflict much sooner than history remembers, potentially averting years of suffering and global devastation. If the Christmas truce had sparked an early end to World War I, the 20th century would have unfolded in dramatically different ways. Without the full-scale devastation of the war, the political and economic landscape of Europe would have been forever altered. Germany, spared from the crushing reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, could have avoided the economic collapse that set the stage for Adolf Hitler's rise to power. The bitter resentment that fueled the rise of National Socialism might have been replaced with a more stable, democratic German state. The absence of World War II would have left Europe far less scarred, with countries focusing on recovery, development, and peaceful cooperation rather than rebuilding from the ashes of war. The early peace could also have changed the trajectory of the Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution, which was partly fueled by the strain of World War I, may not have happened, or at least not in the same way. Without the war's pressures, Tsar Nicholas II might have been able to stabilize his regime, potentially avoiding the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. The communist takeover and the subsequent rise of Stalin might have been delayed or prevented entirely. The absence of a World War II would also have drastically altered colonial movements, with European empires possibly remaining intact for longer and the independence struggles in Asia and Africa taking a different form. Without the destabilization caused by global wars, the social and technological advances of the 20th century could have occurred in a more peaceful, prosperous environment. While the idea of an early peace after the Christmas truce sounds promising, it's important to consider the immense challenges that would have arisen. The political and military leaders of the time were deeply entrenched in their ideologies and strategies. The military-industrial complex, built on years of preparation and war, would have struggled to accept the sudden halt of hostilities. The leaders of both the Allied and Central Powers had invested too much in the war effort, and any peace would have required a complete shift in mindset, with many military leaders unwilling to concede that the war could end without a decisive victory. Additionally, the widespread mistrust between the nations, especially after years of conflict, would have made meaningful negotiations incredibly difficult. The desire for revenge, territorial expansion, and national pride might have fueled resistance to a lasting peace. Another significant challenge would have been the complex web of alliances and the varying interests of the involved nations. Countries like France and Britain, who had suffered heavy casualties, might have been reluctant to make peace without securing substantial victories or territorial gains. On the other hand, the Central Powers, particularly Germany, would have faced political pressure to avoid a humiliating peace that might have undermined their power and standing in Europe. The balance of power in Europe was fragile, and a peace settlement could have shifted the dynamics of the continent in unexpected ways. Furthermore, the absence of a formal war settlement would have left unresolved issues between nations, potentially fueling new conflicts. While the Christmas truce could have been the catalyst for peace, the path to a stable and lasting resolution would have been fraught with difficulties. The Christmas truce of 1914 was a brief, miraculous moment of peace amid the horrors of World War I, showing the power of shared humanity even in the most brutal circumstances. While it ultimately didn't change the course of the war, imagining a world where this spontaneous ceasefire sparked a lasting peace reveals just how different the 20th century could have been. Without the devastation of World War I and its aftermath, the geopolitical landscape would have been reshaped, potentially avoiding World War II, the rise of totalitarian regimes, and the economic collapse that followed. Though the challenges of achieving peace were immense, the possibility of a different history, one shaped by cooperation instead of conflict, remains a powerful reminder of what might have been. The Christmas truce proves that even in war, hope can briefly shine through.
Which month saw the Christmas truce of 1914? What type of terrain separated the soldiers? Which Allied nation participated in the truce? Which game symbolized the truce? Which front saw the Christmas truce? How well did you do? Share your score in the comments.